Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar today. My name is Lauren Hurst. I'm the Managing Director of GreenLeaders DC. Today, we're going to be talking about natural capital, and with us today is Randy Johnson from USDA. One of the most important things about natural capital, of course, is that it is the basis for our entire food supply. Now, the U.S. Department of Agriculture is obviously very concerned with climate change. And not too long ago, President Obama created the Climate Hubs program as part of USDA. And we're joined today by Randy Johnson. He's the director of the program, and he's going to tell us about those, about the Climate Hubs, how they work, and what are some of the best practices and ways that farmers, ranchers, and landowners can take advantage of the different resources that are available to address climate change on the ground in their own operations. So why don't we go ahead and do that? I'd like to welcome Randy. Randy, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's good to be here. Glad to have the opportunity to share what we're doing. All right, so we're the USDA Regional Climate Hubs. I'm the national lead here in Washington, D.C., and Rachel Steele is the national coordinator. So what's this all about? Well, you know, climate change isn't happening in the future. We're seeing impacts now. You've seen the increased drought, reduction in water tables. What was it last year before last? The water table in California dropped 30 feet. Increasing wildfire, just how long they go and the intensity of them, and just the spread of diseases and pests at levels we haven't seen before. So when we're talking about climate change, we're not talking about things way in the future. We're talking about things now. So in 2013, USDA recognized that our stakeholders really weren't getting the science in the form they needed to make climate-informed decisions. So the idea was we needed to come up with some better way to get the science into the hands of land managers. And so in February of 2014, we announced the Climate Hubs. There's 7 hubs and 3 sub-hubs. They're on the map here. And the reason we weren't regional is because the issues farmers and ranchers and forest land managers face are not really national. They're typically local in scope. So we wanted to have regional programs that could address the problems on the ground that are happening now and in the future. So the vision, this is just straight off of the document you'll find, was for agricultural production and natural resources to be maintained and strengthened under increasing climate variability and environmental change. We know the climate is changing. We know the population is increasing. The goods and services coming off our land needs to increase with that. And there's going to be issues seeing how we're having the risk and vulnerabilities increasing as we see today. So our mission really is to develop and then deliver the science-based, regional, specific, or local type information to those farmers and ranchers and forest land managers in a form they can use so that they can make wise decisions. And then we also want to be able to direct them to USDA programs which can help them put that into practice. I mean, people change what they're doing for essentially 3 reasons. You regulate them, which we don't do. You provide incentives, which some of our USDA programs do, or you give them the best information available so they can make wise choices. And the hubs are about the 1/3 of that. So as we looked at how the research goes from the foundational research to the applied, to the packaging and developing into the outreach, we found out that the real weak link in this whole chain was the packaging and development of science. We've got strong research programs, both in the federal government, at universities, and in our NGOs. We've got good outreach things. I mean, we've got cooperative extension, we've got the USDA service centers, land-grant universities. The weak link was that packaging and developing. So that's what we wanted to improve. And in addition to that, we want to increase the dialogue. We need our stakeholders to be telling our research folks what it is they need. Not only do we need to have things packaged, we need to make sure that packaging is right, that the tools and best management practices we deliver are what the farmers are looking for. And that means we need to make sure our research institutions understands the needs. If we're producing a lot of hammers, but they really need saws, then the researchers need to know they need a start looking at different things. So USDA, we looked at what we have in-house. How can we contribute to this endeavor? And if you look through that whole thing, the Forest Service, between the research and development, state and private forestry, and their national forest system, we really covered the whole gambit. Agriculture Research Service is really strong in the research aspects, and they do some packaging developing. National Resource Conservation Service and their tech centers and service centers are really good about outreach. And then we've got all the research and cooperative extension funded by NIFA, our in-house funding agency. And so we had the pieces to put together, but they weren't necessarily all working together. So the hubs are about taking those pieces in addition to our program support, which is coming out of NRCS programs, FSA programs, APHIS, risk management, rural development, and putting this all in a package to help the farmer and rancher do the climate-informed decision making they need to do, so they will stay resilient into the future. And so, you know, we also had to think about how we were going to get that information out to the farmers and ranchers, because we have staffs of between 2 and 4 in each region, and these folks are not going to be visiting every farm out there. We had to take advantage of the existing boots on the ground. So if you look at, you know, who farmers look to, there's a whole range of people they look to for information, and we're really at this point of time emphasizing cooperative extension and e-extension that goes with it, cooperative extension, working with the universities, the land-grant universities, with our USDA service centers that are out in about every county, and with the state climatologists, trying to bring all these people together, giving them the information they need to inform their stakeholders, which are our stakeholders. In the upcoming year, we hope to work more closely with the certified crop consultants, because they're becoming more and more important, because that's a place where farmers are looking to more and more now. So what we're really trying to do is put a network together, that we look at the whole gamut of the science being provided by the federal government, be it the USDA internal research programs of ARS, Forest Service, and others, our extramural funding research through NIFA, the work coming out of our experiment stations, and really all the federal agencies that are working on climate change issues. They go from NASA to NOAA to the Department of Energy. There are 13 federal agencies with really active climate change research programs. So we want to be able to take all that research, turn it into tools and syntheses and information that farmers and ranchers can use, and then get it down to the people on the ground. And that's going to be through, if you look at that bottom there, cooperative extension and e-extension, our service centers in USDA, the Forest Service threat centers, through state climatologists, all these things. And at the same time, be taking their input back up to those research agencies. And we've been around 2 years, so we're getting these networks together. Some places they're stronger than others, but we've got all these people involved. So if you look at how we started out, like I said, we're 2 years old. We're a government organization that's putting something together. So we're accomplishing a lot. We're not where we want to be yet, but we're on the right track. So what we tried to do is put together that network of partners in that diagram I showed you before. We wanted to understand what the risks and vulnerabilities were out on the ground, both now and in the future. So if you look on our website, you'll see regional vulnerability assessments that we've done last year. We want to know what information is out there now in a usable form. So we've put together what we call our tool shed to look at the available tools in the webs, because in order to decide where best to put our resources, we need to know what the needs are, what's already out there, so we can fill in the gaps and use our resources wisely. So that's where we are now. We're kind of in step 4 as we go along. And just to emphasize some things, the hubs have become not only an area where we're looking to translate science, but it's where we're also bringing USDA agencies and other federal climate networks together, better coordinate. One thing that we're aware of when we put this together, there were already federal climate networks out there. The issue was they weren't meeting the needs of the USDA stakeholders, the farmers, the ranchers, and the forest land managers. But we're working closely with those other federal groups because they have some of the science we need. They work with some of the same stakeholders, and so we don't want to have stakeholder fatigue where you get to go to 4 meetings a year to tell different federal groups the same thing you keep saying over and over. So we work closely with the climate science centers from the U.S. Geological Service. That's Department of Interior. Likewise, the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives is also in the Department of Interior. And then NOAA has some strong programs we work with as well. Their RESAs, their Regional Integrated Science and Assessment Programs, and their Regional Climate Centers. So we take advantage of the existing things already out there. So if you want to know really what's going on and how we get to what information we have, the best place right now to go is to our website. And the address is www.usda.gov/climatehubs. And there you'll find things like regional specific information for people. If you want to get some information on livestock, you don't want to know about livestock in the Southeast if you're in the Great Plains. So we're trying to put that information out there in a form and locality specific that'll be useful. And that set of information is growing every day. I told you about the regional vulnerability assessments. They're about 50 pages long. They're not overly technical, but it gives you an idea of the changes we're seeing now and what to expect in the future. The tool shed, if you're looking for tools to help you understand climate impacts or make some decisions around climate, we got about 140 when this slide was made tools out there. And honestly, some are really good and a lot you'll look at and you'll just click on to the next one. So not only are we inventorying them, we're also trying to look at them and decide which ones are useful, and those that are, we want to be able to promote them down the line, and those that aren't, we want to be able to work with the people who put them together to provide the input they need to make them useful. Here's an example of just some of the drought tools you'll find. And a recent example of how we're trying to do the translation is the Forest Service put out their assessment of forest drought and forest. And it's a 300-page technical document, which honestly, most people aren't going to sit down and read because they don't have the time to go through that amount of stuff. So what we've done is we've put together 2-pagers for our 8 regions to give you a broad glimpse of what's happening now, what to expect in the future, and what are some options you can do to get your forest better adapted and more resilient to deal with it. So that's the type of translation we're talking about. So that's just a quick overview of where we've come from, where we're going, and what's available now. And I'm open for questions.
Okay, let me start with a question about related to the different data and the technology that's available now. Like you said in your presentation, that there's so many tools that are available now for people. But I think one of the biggest challenges you have is just being able to use it all and make sense of it all. So let me ask you, I mean, through your different programs, do you provide any sort of training so that the people on the ground can really make the best use of these tools? And first of all, identify the tools that make most sense for them, and then be able to integrate that into their operations.
We're working on that. An example of that now is if you look at what USDA's just come up with their building blocks for mitigation. The hubs are putting together a series of workshops working mostly with people in our USDA service centers, but also some ag extension folks to help them understand the principles involved, and then pointing them to the tools that are helpful, things like COMET and how to measure carbon on the farm, and helping them understand how USDA programs can help a farmer or rancher or forest land manager do a better job of mitigating climate change through programs like EQIP and and other NRCS and FSA programs. We do have some adaptation workshops. Like I said, most of these workshops and training is for the extension agents, the service center people, the trusted advisors of the farmers and ranchers, and not necessarily for the farmers and ranchers themselves. Although they're welcome to come, what we understand is, and what I've noticed is, a land manager isn't going to change because he sees something on the web or reads it in a technical magazine. They change because they've had conversations with trusted advisors, and they're going to take that information from those advisors and first try something on a small scale, but they work with people. Very seldom does somebody just see something on the web and decide they're going to change their 40 acres from X to Y. So we're stressing working with those trusted advisors, and those are the people we're trying to train. We're working, for example, with the Climate Learning Network, which is working with Cooperative Extension to provide them tools and resources for them to do their job better. Does
Okay,
that
great.
help?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me ask you a little bit more about e-extension. Can you explain a little bit more about how that works and how that integrates into your core mission?
Well, we've been working with this group, the Climate Learning Network, now for about a year and a half, and they're working on courses and syntheses that will be available to extension professionals and other people who can get in to e-extension, which is really everybody. So it's just another avenue to get information out. We're doing that. If you look also in e-extension, there's a my mind just went back, is a group that's also looking at forestry and climate change. If you go through e-extension, you can find that group, and you can find people there who can help answer their questions. I don't know how much people outside of extension use it, but we find it a good way to connect with extension.
Okay, great. GreenLeaders DC, of course, I mean, we're a big advocate of video conferencing and online collaboration. So that's one of the things that we feel is very important to really build those relationships like you were talking about. There's a lot of information, a lot of technology out there, but it's very difficult to ID which ones are best for your particular situation. And you really do need that guidance and the wisdom, if you will, of somebody who has actually used it in the past. So can you give us any examples of any success stories that you've seen, by using e-extension or the local partners in taking up some of the tools that you've talked about?
Honestly, at this point, I can't point to any. I mean, the extension modules are just coming online now. We are finding that people do show up to our webinars that we've had. We've had 4 through the Climate Learning Network. We've worked with, right now, it's really too soon to see a lot of results. And here's the other issue we're going to have is as we work through trusted partners, the real effects are going to be seen by the farmer and rancher. Then we have to let that work its way back up through the system. So other than attendance at webinars, I can't give you too much right now.
Okay, all right. And let me ask you this. How does one become a partner? Okay, like you said, you are utilizing the resources that are existing on the ground. What type of people are your partners on the ground? You've mentioned extension programs, but you also have others who are local landowner owners or others. Is there a typical profile of a partner that people can reach out to in their local communities?
Well, in their local communities, the first place I'd go would be to a USDA service center. Since we are a USDA entity, that is the group we're trying to work through first. We're trying to empower USDA agencies and programs to do their job better to help the land manager. Some areas we've done better than others. If you really want to contact us, the key is to get up with your local regional director. Many of our regions have quarterly or monthly newsletters. They will let you know when they're having webinars. They want your input. So I encourage you to reach out to those, and you can find those folks on our webpage.
Okay, that's great. Now, another question I have right now is about financial incentives. Of course, when you are dealing with landowners, this is a big investment, for a lot of people when you're dealing with forestry and agriculture. Can you tell us a little bit in general terms about the financial incentives that some of these folks have to actually implement some of these best practices to address climate change and increase resilience and adaptation?
Okay, and once again, I'll point you specifically to the service centers. As you look at the NRCS and FSA programs like EQIP, which can help you get into minimum tillage or no-till. CRP, which can help you put set-asides together on your lower productive lands and allow it to really sequester carbon and provide other environmental benefits. The list goes on and on. We're working in USDA to try to do a better job of putting all this together. There's a new farmers website which can help people go in and see what programs might be beneficial to them based upon their location, their crops, their desired outcome. I don't have that on the tip of my tongue right now, but I'm sure if you were to Google new farmer in USDA, you can come across that. I, being Forest Service, I'm in the first rotation as the lead. Another agency will provide the lead starting next year. I'm learning more and more about what is available through these programs and the best way to do it. And as I talk to my counterparts in FSA and RCS, it's really to sit down with a person at your service center. Most counties have one, and they can walk you through all the USD programs, whether they're coming from rural development or Farm Services Agency or NRCS or anything else coming from USDA.
Okay, great. I'd like to shift gears a little bit and ask you a little bit about your own experience and your own opinion with respect to how much climate change is a concern for landowners and ranchers and forest owners at this point. In your dealings with the different stakeholders, what is the level of interest and understanding of the risks that climate change poses to agriculture and the different natural capital bases like water and forestry that we have in this country? Where would you say it is now, and do you think it's increasing in terms of how people appreciate climate change and what risks it poses to them?
I think people appreciate the risk and the vulnerabilities they're seeing now. And I mean, we're seeing increased drought. We're seeing increased extreme weather events. I mean, when I first came on 2 years ago, the Southern Plains was in a severe drought. And all of a sudden last year, it's severe flooding with threats of dams breaking. These are things which we've seen in the past, but the intensity has not been quite the same. Take, for example, the drought in California. They've had droughts, but now we've seen a 4 or 5 year drought that most people can't remember. So people acknowledge that weather, maybe not climate, but that weather seems to be more and more difficult to contend with. They acknowledge that growing seasons now are longer than when their parents were farming. There's acknowledgement, like for example, in the forestry community, that pests and diseases are just spreading further and faster. The mountain pine beetle epidemic in our West is an example of that. So I think people acknowledge that we're seeing things happen differently than the past. I'm not sure they want to claim that it's climate change. And so as we work with people, we want to get a dialogue going. We want to discuss about risk and vulnerability, but we realize we have to first discuss the risk and vulnerability that's happening today on the ground. Most farmers aren't worried about 20 years. They're worried about making a profit on their crop so they're in business next year. And we don't discount that. We understand that's how we have to work with them now, but we want their eyes open to know that these changes we're seeing could get even more severe in the future. So, what you'll find is a lot of people will agree with all these impacts, and they might even agree there's climate change. The issue sometimes is, am I fault. And we're not even dealing with that. We're just trying to help people do the right thing for the right reasons.
Okay, great. A very practical approach. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you about financial incentives, is because when you're working within the confines of the economy, it's great to talk about climate change, and sea level rise will, be catastrophic by 2100. But that's quite a few years down the road, and what we have to do is deal with what's in front of us right now. So it sounds like your emphasis is more really on the practical day-to-day approach of how you deal with the planting season for this year and next year.
Yeah, it is. That's not to say we don't deal with the future. I mean, that's one thing we want to bring to the table is we help people work through the impacts of climate, but we acknowledge that you've got to survive day to day to even get there. Because, I mean, one time we were accused of just trying to sucker people into climate change by calling it something else, and that's not the case. I mean, when you establish a dialogue with somebody, the key is not to go in there and press their buttons before you even start. We want a dialogue by first meeting them where they are, understanding their needs, understanding their problems, working with them, and then helping them see the future. But to come in and say, hi, I'm with the federal government, I'm here to help you with climate change, is usually not the way to work with a farmer, rancher, or forest land manager, because that's 3 strikes to start with.
That's right. Let me ask you a little bit more about that, about specifically stakeholder engagement, because yes, you do hear a lot of stories about people come in, they talk about climate change, which for a lot of people is a non-starter. It's almost a red flag and they almost shut down to communication for various reasons. So now, on the other hand, you've also heard a lot of stories out in the West where you do have different stakeholders coming together around a common interest. And I think this is where natural capital comes in, because people have a certain valuation that they put on the land. Now, natural capital itself is controversial because how do you put a value on spiritual or even recreational values in the land and the rights of animals and landscapes simply to exist? But you do hear stories about ranchers, tribal communities, government entities actually coming together and putting together a robust stakeholder engagement process where everybody sees the common benefit that they're trying to strive for, and they've made real progress. Have you seen that through your organization? And how do you think we could replicate those types of scenarios around farming and agriculture?
Okay. I'm seeing more and more of this. It's not quite through the hubs per se. I mean, we're about the technical information, but I'm looking at things like NRCS's regional cooperative programs where they're trying to bring landholders together on a regional basis to accomplish common goals, whether it's, water quality. In some cases, it's like, we don't want to be regulated by EPA because of water pollution. So what can we do on our land to avoid these regulations and do the right thing? So NRCS has these regional programs. On the other side, one of those groups I talked about, the landscape conservation cooperatives, they're all about bringing people together on a regional basis to work out common issues and group solutions. So that's a federal effort underway. That is mostly, while it is an all lands approach, you'll find it's mostly government agencies, be they local, state, or federal, but they are more and more bringing in the private landowners into that thinking. So I'm seeing it. We might not be seeing it as much as we should, but I think we've made a good start. And like I said, that the hubs are about information, not necessarily coordination, but we can point people to those NRCS programs, to the landscape conservation cooperatives, through other things. California has a number of initiatives as well. So our job is to be able to point people where they need to go.
Okay, great. Now, one of your slides, and I might ask you to go back to the slide, you had a slide about tasks that you're currently focused on. And I wanted to ask you a little bit more about that. And, your program is a new program. You've made some progress, but you said that there's also a lot more progress to be made. So if we can take a look at the tasks again, I wanted to ask you, what are your priority goals right now in terms of reaching out to stakeholders and the different goals that you want to accomplish in the next 3 to 5 years?
All right. You know, probably number one is continue to build that network of partners. We don't have really all the universities we need together in that that network we need. I mean, where we've been able to bring in all the land grant universities to work together and to just take advantage of each other's resources, we're seeing great gains. We need to do that more and more. We need to bring in more of our non-traditional land grant universities, the 1890s, the 1960s. I always lose track of those numbers, but bring in more of the marginal populations, those who aren't getting what they need. And we need to start working more with the certified crop consultants. What we have found is, if you look at some of the work that Linda Propsky's done and her useful to usable project, is farmers are looking more and more to those advisors, to their seed dealers, to their fertilizer dealers for their information decision makings, more so than they have in the past when they would look to their service centers and their cooperative extension. That's not to discount what cooperative extension does, because if you look at where those advisors go for information, they're always going back to extension. But it seems like those private advisors are gaining more and more of a foothold, and we want to work more closely with them, because that's how we'll get information better to the land managers. And we really now that we've got our structure together and making progress, we want to do more syntheses. We want to be able to take the work that ARIS is doing, like Jerry Hatfield out in the Midwest, on how you deal with fewer workable days in the field, and come up with those solutions in a manner where we can provide that information in a way that a farmer can quickly understand it and figure out what to do with it. Likewise, our NRCS programs in soil health, working not only to improve conservation things, but will also give you better resilience in the field as you develop more soil organic matter, better water holding capacity, better cation exchange capacity. How do we communicate that better? So not only, here's the tricky part. There's plenty of technical information. We're working to translate it better, but the science of how to really communicate is almost in its infancy when it comes to this point. As I look throughout the federal government, what we're all realizing is we need more social scientists. We need to know how to communicate better. We need to know how to communicate in a language which the landowner can understand. And it usually isn't the way scientists do. I mean, if I come and talk to you, I want to increase your soil health or your soil carbon, you'll have a question mark. If I want to come and say, I want to help you increase your productivity, make your crops more resilient so that you can increase production and increase your bottom line, you'll listen to me better. So we're trying to learn not only what to translate, but how to translate it. And that's, for scientists, that can be hard. So we're looking at that small group of people who are scientists who can talk the layman's language. And if you've talked with enough of a scientist, that's not always easy.
Beginning is that you do have a lot of information, a lot of technical information, the technology. How do you use it? And one of the biggest benefits and tools we can use is knowledge brokerage. And like I said, I think the idea that you have of using people on the ground to explain this stuff, to act as a go-between, is a very, very useful concept. So would you think about focusing more on cultivating these knowledge brokers, for example? And how would you, if you could do that, what would be the profile of such an organization or person?
Well, I think that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're just trying to figure out how to do it. If you look at knowledge movement, I mean, usually there's key people in every community. And if you can map where people go for information, you can see who the real players are. So we're trying to do that as we understand through cooperative extension, that they can provide insight. We're trying to do more and more demonstrations. I mean, one way we're going to get people to change is they need to see what we're suggesting on the ground near them. So, you know, you drive down a road, there's this green field on one side, there's a brown field on the other side. They want to know why one's green. And so part of that is finding those knowledge leaders, those people who are willing to step out at first and try it, and working with them so that they can demonstrate, you know, what we're suggesting so that others can see it and then move forward. Because most people want to see something on the ground and see it work before it happens. And that, just like you said, those knowledge brokers are going to be those key extension people, those key farmers that everybody look to in a region, because they're the ones who step out and take the chances and have made the progress. So I'm in full agreement with you there.
Okay. Yeah, storytelling is always a good way to demonstrate things in practice and in a context.
Yeah. I mean, in forestry, for example, when we're trying to put together a tree breeding cooperative in New Zealand, I could show people expected gains from equations and statistics, but when I took somebody out and I said, see this big stand of trees, and see this other stand of trees, they were planted the same year on the same ground, you know, these have genetics different than those. People would go, I want those. And that's the same thing I think we're going to have to do here. As we develop farming practices which are more resilient, we're going to see the differences on the ground, and that is what's going to change people, is an experience, not just some facts.
Okay, great. Well, we're going to wrap it up right there. So again, Randy, stick around for just a second. I'd like to thank everybody for watching today. Again, this video will be available on YouTube in the next 24 to 48 hours. If you signed up for this to view us today, I'll go ahead and send that out to you when it's ready, and you can watch this whenever you like. So again, I'd like to thank Randy Johnson, the USDA Climate Hubs program, for joining us today, and we'll see you next time. Join us on April 7th, where we will actually be talking with one of the people who works at the extension programs in Georgia to talk about some of the career paths that young people can take in forestry and extension that has a lot to do with Climate Hubs and the work that USDA is doing. So we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.